So welcome, everyone. I see a lot of smiles over here. Hello, hello. This is our 772nd meeting of the Economic Club of New York, and I'm Barbara Van Allen, President and CEO of the club, and I'm honored to be with all of you today. Recognized as the premier nonpartisan forum for discussions on social, economic, and political issues, the club has actually been around now for more than a century and has hosted over 1,000 prominent guests from every sector of the economy and frankly, every corner of the globe. So I'd like to take a moment to welcome students that are joining us today virtually from Princeton University, Baruch College, and the Graduate Center at CUNY, as well as members of our largest ever class of fellows. As you all know, or many of you have been sponsors of fellows, this is a select group of diverse, rising, next-gen business thought leaders, and today they number 87. It's an annual program. It's open now. We do have applications on our website, and you can get them from the team at the front door. We also have a virtual National Fellows component, so we have folks joining the Fellows program from actually around the country and as far away as Beijing. So please keep that in mind if you know of some very talented folks that might like to participate in that annual program. And we also want to give a warm welcome. Somewhere Daisy is here, the president of the Women's Forum. Thank you, Daisy. Daisy and I served together on the Women's Forum board. And Daisy and other members of the Women's Forum, thank you for joining us today. So it's an honor to introduce our guest, Valerie Jarrett, who served as senior advisor the senior advisor to President Barack Obama from 2009 to 2017, and that made her, I believe, the longest serving advisor in history to a president. Today, she's CEO and a board member of the Barack Obama Foundation. She's also a senior distinguished fellow at the University of Chicago Law School. She's the board chair of Civic Nation and serves on the board of several other companies, including Walgreens Boots Alliance, Ralph Lauren, Sweet Green, I love their salads, Ariel Investments, the University of Chicago, and Sesame Street Workshop. We have to talk about that. I know a lot of people do. Valerie also serves on the Goldman Sachs 1 Million Black Women Advisory Board, the Bank of America's Enterprise Executive Development Council, and the Microsoft Advisory Council. During her time in the Obama administration, she oversaw the Office of Public Engagement and Intergovernmental Affairs and chaired the White House Council on Women and Girls. She led efforts to expand access to middle-class individuals, boost American businesses, and of course, grow our economy. She oversaw the administration's advocacy for workplace policies that empower working families, including equal pay, paid leave, paid sick days, workplace flexibility, affordable child care, and raising the minimum wage. She also led campaigns to reform our criminal justice system and sexual assault and reduce gun violence. Much of this was chronicled in her 2019 best-selling book, Finding My Voice, My Journey to the West Wing, and the Path Forward. Today, Valerie will be in a conversation with someone she knows very well, her daughter, Laura Jarrett. Laura is co-anchor of Saturday Today and senior legal counsel, correspondent, sorry, well, actually counsel too, for NBC News. And we're thrilled to have her with us. This is just a wonderful treat for us. This event is also part of our equity and inclusion programming. As you may know, the club launched our E&I programming back in 2020 with the founding support of our corporate partners, which included and still include in some cases BlackRock, Bloomberg, MasterCard, PayPal, S&P Global, and Taconic Capital. And this program continues and will continue into the future. As a reminder, the conversation today is on the record. We do have media on the line and media in the room. We will end promptly at 1 o'clock, and if time permits, and time will permit, so get your questions ready. Valerie's planning on taking some audience questions from those in the room, and we'll have 2 mics to handle that. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Valerie and daughter Laura to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Making sure I don't trip coming up the steps. That's always nice.
We just want to start off right here. Barbara, thank you so much. This is such a treat. It's so nice to be with all of you. I spend my day job at NBC pressing very powerful people for the smallest little nugget of information. So I'll let you guys be the judge how I do here with probably a dream interview. And we don't really get to do this that often. You do this all the time, and I do this sometimes, but we don't often get to do this together. So thank you for bringing us together in the middle of the day, which is a rarity. As you heard Barbara run through the incredible CV of Valerie Jarrett here, I know some of you have served on boards with her or know her in a personal capacity, or maybe you read her book and were inspired by some gem of wisdom, which I had the privilege of editing over Thanksgiving one year. But I have known her in her other job as mom, and she went through all of the things that Barbara just laid out for you, all while doing that as a single mom, which I think is a pretty incredible feat. She is tough and she is fearless and she is kind, but I think she would be the first to admit that she was shy as a child. And I think we can unpack some of that maybe a little bit today, because I don't think anybody who knows her public persona would say that she's shy now. I thought it might be helpful just to orient the conversation, given there are so many different topics and things that I'm sure are of interest to our members, to have a theme for our conversation today. And I submit to you that our theme should be resilience, because it's a theme that runs throughout her career. It's a theme that certainly runs throughout her personal life. And I think it's probably a business imperative to anyone who is either a boss or as an employee and trying to figure out how to impress their boss. And I know that everybody is always interested in your lessons along the way. So we're going to take questions at the end, and I know we have some member questions that we received ahead of time that I'll try to weave in to my little script here. So you know I like to start at the beginning. I like to start chronologically. You would be the first to say that in your 20s, Mom, you set out with a plan, and then things did not go quite as planned. So given my theme of resilience, take us back to Valerie Jarrett in her early 30s, crying in her office at the then named Sears Tower. What was Valerie Jarrett getting right at that time? What was she getting wrong? And how did she get on the other side of it?
Wow. Okay, so first of all, there's nothing more joyful than watching your daughter do her job really, really well. I'm sitting here thinking, that's my baby. Best job I ever had was raising this wonderful, incredible adult. So thank you for the question. And so I do begin my book, just as Laura described it, 10 years into my 10-year plan. And when I was in college, everybody seemed to have a plan. And I had really no idea what I wanted to do. First, I thought I would go into medicine because my dad was a doctor. And two things happened. I took organic chemistry and I visited my boyfriend's anatomy class and looked at a cadaver. That was the end of that. Then I thought I'd go to business school, which I still regret not having done. And there was a great party the day before the GMAT exam, and I never quite made it to the GMAT exam. But I did apply to law school, and my best friend said, just go to law school, you'll buy yourself some time. So I thought, all right, everybody has a plan, I better make a plan. So my plan went like this. I'd go to law school, I'd figure out what in the world I was doing there. I would discover my passion, go back home to Chicago where I'd grown up, fall in love, get married, and have a baby before I turned 30, think about that biological clock, and then I would live happily ever after. And I did everything, checked all those boxes, went to law school, went to one firm, went to a better law firm, married figuratively the boy next door, in that our moms grew up literally in the same apartment building. Our dads were friends. He was a doctor. My father was a doctor. I'd had a crush on him since I was 8 and he was 12, unrequited at that age. And so we saw each other at a cousin's wedding, and I thought, perfect, I will marry you. What could possibly go wrong? Plenty, and it did. I did have Laura just shy of my 29th birthday, but I did discover that I had been listening to all these other voices and not the most important one, which is the quiet one inside of each of us. And I really had not yet figured out what my passion was. And so in 1987, when you don't know what to do, you phone a friend, and I called one of my best friends who I just saw Saturday, and I said, I don't know what to do, I'm miserable. And we had lunch, and he said, why don't you consider public service? You'll be a part of something bigger and more important than yourself. And Mayor Harold Washington had just been reelected mayor of Chicago, and he was this delicious, progressive, big bear, inclusive kind of guy. And I thought, why not? And part of my impetus, which I say with Laura here, which she will attest to, is that my mom was also a working mother. And at a time when most mothers were not working, she's just about to turn 96. She just retired a couple of years ago. And I was always very proud of her, but felt like she was this incredible mom. So she had managed that mighty juggle. And I was so impressed by her trailblazing in the field of early childhood development. And I thought if I continued at that law firm, Laura would never feel the same way about me as I felt about my mom. So I thank you for also being a quick kick in the pants to try something new. And so I swerved and I joined local government. But I did grow up painfully shy. I mean, I can remember like in law school, everybody had their hand up and I was like, please don't call out me. Or I'd go to a dinner party with my mother and I would talk to her and she'd say, you have to turn around and talk to the person on the other side of you. And I would say, why? Why can't I just talk to you? And I think part of it was we traveled around a lot when I was young, and I just was always in these new situations, and the way I kind of dealt with it, I think, was to just be kind of private. And also, because I had this kind of, call it exotic childhood, I just wanted to be like all the other kids. And so I was afraid if I got into a conversation with strangers, they would ask me questions and I'd have to explain like why my parents took me all over the world. And so it was just easier to kind of pull back. So that's the beginning from your description.
Okay, so you're at the law firms, you're in the mighty juggle. Did you see anybody whose life you said, oh, I want that? If I just work a little bit harder and I just work 90 hours and I just stay late and I impress everybody, then I can have that. Did you see any other women whose lives you were trying to emulate?
No.
No. Did it matter to you?
That was, yeah, well, that was the problem. I thought, okay, I'm working 100 hours a week, and to what end? When I reached the top, which is to be partner, will that be satisfying? And I just looked around and it didn't look like, sorry to any of the partners in law firms here or outside, it just didn't look like the people who were thriving on things that I just didn't care about. And I think part of the magic of Mayor Washington, and I had licked envelopes for his campaign and knocked on doors, and I just wanted to do something that I felt was purposeful, where I could take the skills that I had and try to be this force for good. And I did not feel that the force that I was doing at the law firm was actually terribly important.
Did you think about running for office yourself?
There have been, not then, because I was way too shy. I'd have to talk to people if I ran for office. So when I first joined the city, I was really kind of, I was beat up. I was in the middle of this divorce. The path that I thought was the perfect path kind of imploded. And my paperback book subtitle is When the Perfect Plan Crumbles, the Adventure Begins. But when you're about to begin an adventure, you're terrified. And so I will say what happened when I joined local government is I did have an incredible mentor. And she kind of took me under her wing in a lot of ways and motivated me to understand what public service is all about, beginning with listening, beginning with learning how to take a punch. I used to go to hearings all the time and people were always yelling, or I'd go out to a community meeting and people would be arguing with each other and then with me. And Lucille Dobbins, her name, really kind of pushed me to just realize that this wasn't about me. This was about trying to be helpful to people who never really felt that government was working for them, and learning that at the local level. And you'll remember this because you were with me at some of those community meetings. One in particular, some guy came up to me, and Laura was, 8, and he just started screaming at me. And I watched her face and I thought, uh-oh. Because I tried to take her so she could see what I was doing, demystify. And some of them were like adventures going to Japan with Maggie Daley, the mayor's wife, and some of them were going to community meetings when I got yelled at, but that one was probably a mistake taking her. But it did, and then we had demonstrators in front of our home, and she wasn't very happy with that. In fact, that was a good example of where she said to me, why are you doing this to us? And you were about age 11. And I said, because I'd rather be the one making these tough decisions than somebody else. But during that whole period of time, I never really thought about running for office until about 2006, when Mayor Daley wasn't sure if he was going to run for another term. And I did think at that point, I'd been in city government for 8 years. I'd worked with city government for another 8 years. I chaired the Chicago Transit Board. And so I had been in and around government for a long time. And I thought, well, maybe I should run for office.
I didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
No.
Well, you were in law school by then, maybe. So, or college, certainly. You were in college. And so I toyed with it. And then he decided to run. And President Obama decided to run, and so then it kind of, no. Although I will say, when President Obama won, you do know this, there was a moment there where you and my parents and
We were going to get to that.
Oh, you want me to get to that now?
No, go ahead.
All
We're
right,
getting there, don't worry.
So when President Obama won, Laura, my parents, my best friends all thought I should put my hat in the ring to be his successor in the Senate. And I really did think about it. And then President-elect Obama said, look, I know the Senate, and I know you, and you will have much more fun in the White House with me. And so that was about it. And then you reach a certain stage in life where, like right now, I love my job. I have the perfect job, but being a present and engaged grandparent is more important to me than anything. And you can't run for office when you are a full-time grandma as best you can.
My children would love to stump for her and be out there licking envelopes from you, I'm sure.
Yep.
Okay, I want to go back. We're gonna come to that, but I do want to bring up a question from one of the members who submitted something ahead of time that you touched on about growing up in the Middle East, because I think that was such an important part of those early years for you, and you talk about how it kind of, you were trying to figure out how to fit in. But it did give you, I think you would say, a different perspective.
Yes.
Both in your work in public service and in the private sector. So speak about that just a
So
little
very much so. So in the 50s, when the United States was still living under Jim Crow, my parents, my mom grew up in Chicago, my dad grew up in DC. They fell in love, got married. My father joined the Army. And when he was leaving the Army, he wanted to go into academic medicine. And he could not find a job in the United States at a major academic teaching hospital, which was his passion. So he and my mom started looking for job opportunities outside of the United States. And at that point, the United States and Iran had very strong diplomatic ties. And the Shah of Iran was focusing on improving healthcare in parts of the country that were underserved. And my father landed a job to help start the first major hospital in Shiraz, Iran, and chair the Department of Pathology, a job that was not available to him here in the United States. And so here my parents are. They'd been married 5 years, I think, at that point. And they just took this leap of faith and went, halfway around the world to a country where they didn't speak the language, they didn't know the culture. They literally just jumped, and their parents said, don't go. Everybody around them said, you're nuts, and my parents are a little crazy. And so off they went. And so I was the second baby born in the Namazi hospital. They practiced on another baby first before me. And we lived there till I was 5. And from there, my father had done research in Shiraz that caught the attention of folks at the Galton Labs at University College of London. And so he was offered a 1-year fellowship, and my parents went there for a year, thinking, well, maybe they would go back to Iran, maybe they wouldn't. And then he was giving a paper at an international conference. And don't you know, the dean of the University of Chicago Medical Center was at the conference and offered him a job based on the research he did in Iran. And so growing up, my father used to always say, sometimes the shortest distance to where you really want to go means you better take the scenic route. And they certainly took the scenic route. And the University of Chicago, for those of you who know Chicago, I can know Paula does, is adjacent to Hyde Park, Kenwood. And my mother's mother and her sister and 4 of her cousins all lived in Hyde Park. And so truly it was a full circle moment. And then, but there were a couple of other really important lessons, I think, that I learned through that journey. And then I would say almost every summer until I was in high school, we would go back to Iran, and we would also travel through Africa because my father was doing research on diversity of blood diseases, and we would go from Ghana to Nigeria to Uganda to Ethiopia to Egypt and then back to Iran. And everybody else was going to summer camp. And I wanted to go to summer camp. And you'd come back and people go, what did you do this summer? And I was like, do I really have to explain, like going all over the world? But I know. And now I'm thinking, oh, what an extraordinary experience my parents gave me, right? And the lessons I would say, summarizing from Iran and the travel, were a few things. Number one, I do think I can walk into a room and I can find something in common with whoever's in that room. And maybe it comes from growing up on a hospital compound with children from all over the world. And we spoke different languages. We spoke Farsi and French and English, and sometimes all in the same sentence. And kids are kids, and you learn that kids are kids and that you can find something in common. The other thing I learned, that sometimes folks who don't travel outside of the United States just take what we have for granted. And it could be our freedoms of speech or association or any of our constitutional rights of a democracy. Or my mom used to boil everything I drank and peel everything I ate and worried about illnesses for which there were no cures. And so I do not take what we have here for granted. And then the final thing we learned, which did inform my position on foreign policy in the White House, was the United States is an amazing country, but hey, guess what, you guys? It's not the only country on earth. And we can learn a great deal if we're willing to open up and listen to ideas that come from different places. And so it was, in retrospect, an extraordinary childhood to have had. But it did make for difficult conversations when everybody would just stare at me and say, you were from where? And let's face it, until the hostage crisis under Carter, President Carter, whose 100th birthday is today, by the way, which is extraordinary, since I still remember it was the first election I voted for president. But until then, no one had heard of Iran. And then after that, everybody had heard of Iran. And let's face it, it's only gotten worse since then. And so I took a lot of crap for having been born in Iran, both as a child and certainly as an adult and certainly in the White House. But now I realize what an extraordinary gift it was that my parents gave me.
That's certainly a unique one that not everybody had. And you touched on your father's experience with segregation and discrimination, which I think is another lesson in resilience, obviously, that you were watching, even if you didn't know all of the ins and outs that were happening at the time. But it also strikes me, both of your parents are academics. Your parents don't have a background in business. Your parents don't have a background in law. Your parents don't have a background in city politics. So how did you even figure out what was going on? Who did you go to figure out how to navigate that?
Well, it was hard. I always say it's hard to be what you can't see. And certainly my parents gave me the gift of an extraordinary education and this world perspective, but they were not lawyers. They had no idea. I can remember when I went to law school, you pick up your books and they assign you classes your first semester. And I was taking a class called torts. And I was like, dessert? Like torts? I didn't know what a tort was. I mean, I literally was just lost at sea in law school in the beginning. And you just figure it out. And I think you work hard and I did come from not just my parents, but my grandparents and my great-parents all believed in education and all believed in hard work and all believed that, when you get knocked down, you'll be fine. And it's kind of a joke with Laura and me, because when she was young, no matter what happened, I'd say, oh, you'll be fine. Even though I was terrified about what had happened to her, I thought, oh, you'll be fine. And that's what my parents always said to me. It's not what happens to you, it's what you do about it. Just get back up and keep fighting. And so I think instilling that kind of value of resilience and then the practice of getting knocked down a few times and seeing that you can get back up has stood me in good stead.
And you said you wished you had gone to business school.
I sure do, because I had to learn it on the job. And the reason I didn't go to business school is just stupid. It was like one more year to get a joint degree. And you look back on that and you think about one more year is what kept you from getting this incredible additional tool. But, I figured it out on the job and, I served on a number of boards early in my career before I went to the White House and then after. And I also asked for help. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the life lessons in terms of leadership I've learned is you don't know all the answers, and that actually people feel more of a sense of investment in you if you're willing to be a little vulnerable. And early in my career, after I'd practiced law for 10 years, 6 in the private sector and 4 for city government, I became the Commissioner of Planning and Development. And I didn't know anything about urban planning other than being the lawyer for that department. And so my senior team, they all had PhDs in urban planning, and I would just say to them, explain to me what a planned unit development is from your perspective. I know how to document it, but how do you decide what goes in it? And they then felt this sense of empowerment to help and be a part of the team, as opposed to thinking I had all the answers because they knew I did not.
And how did you even then manage to get on your first corporate board?
Now, that's a good story. So the managing partner of my law firm, when I left, I had the good sense to go into him and tell him personally that I was leaving, and I explained to him I was going to work for the city, and he was kind of a political junkie, which I didn't know at the time. And he said, well, from time to time, could we have lunch? And I'm like, sure, of course I'd have lunch. You used to terrify me, but now, of course, if you want to have lunch with me, okay. And so he called, Don Lubin was his name, and he called me periodically over the 8 years I was in city government. And we would have lunch, and I would give him all the intricacies of what was going on, and he just loved that. And after I left city government, maybe 6 months later, he called me, and he said, I've been working on a company that's spinning off one of its units, and it's going to go public. Would you like to go on the board? And I said, well, why, sure, why not? And I realized, if I hadn't stayed in touch with him, I wouldn't have been top of mind. And so it is kind of a life lesson that, stick with the people who are willing to invest in you and care about you. And so he got me on that board. And one of the biggest lessons I learned on that board, because I was in my late 30s, and again, here I am, never been on a corporate board, just out of government, had been a lawyer. And I remember my first board meeting, I had a question, and I didn't ask it. And the largest shareholder of the company had the principal on the board. And he's a very successful billionaire from Chicago, and I was, very impressed with him. And don't you know, he asked my question. And I was like, darn it, why didn't I ask that question? So for reasons I can't explain, he asked me for a ride home. Why he didn't have a car way home, I'm not sure. But anyway, he asked me for a ride home. And I'm driving, I'm thinking, oh God, please don't have an accident with this guy in the car, it's gonna be a thing. And I said to him, I said, I was thinking about that same question you asked. He goes, well, why didn't you ask it? I said, I thought that was kind of a stupid question. He goes, there are no stupid questions when you're on the board. And what a great lesson to learn at my first board meeting on my very first board. And I've kept that in mind, and I've not been shy about asking questions ever since.
Wow. I've never heard that story either. This is really news to me.
In my next book.
Okay, but you didn't get an MBA, so you had to learn certain things on the job, like how to read a balance sheet. This is before Google, so what are you doing? How are you learning this?
I asked people for help. I mean, look, when I joined boards, I spent a lot of time with the CFOs, and I would make them walk me through it. Even working for the city government, I didn't know anything about a budget. I got appointed October 4th. I had to go in and support my budget before the city council 4 days later. Crash course in budgeting. And I brought in the person in my department responsible for putting together the budget, and I said, tell me everything you know. And I was a sponge. And so, look, you figure it out. And I guess the more you figure out, the more you think you can figure out.
At the same time as you're learning on the job and being a sponge, you meet a terrific young lawyer named Michelle Robinson, who sort of sets you on a track that has now become quite memorable.
Yeah.
What struck you about her in the beginning?
So this is 33 years ago, summer of 1991. But between practicing law and running the Department of Planning, I was Deputy Chief of Staff for Mayor Daley. And he told me to go out and try to recruit people to join the mayor's office. And so a dear friend who was the corporation counsel sent me a resume, and across the top it said, brilliant young lawyer, has no interest in being at a big law firm. And I thought, my kind of person. So I called up Michelle Robinson. I said, would you like to come in and talk? And so I still can see her walking in my office door, and I'm in the mayor's office, big sign, office of the mayor. It's a little intimidating, so I thought. She walks right in, looks me in the eye, shakes my hand, sees her resume on my desk, never mentions Princeton undergrad, Harvard Law School, Sidley Austin. What does she do? She tells me her story, which you all now kind of know as the quintessential American story, growing up on the south side of Chicago, working class parents who hadn't gone to college but believed in hard work and education and giving back. And she said, but what's really struck me was that my father and my best friend died within the prior year. And it was such a painful wake-up call about the limit of life. It's not infinite. And they were sudden deaths. And so she said it just really shocked her. And she said, am I leading a purposeful life? And she said, I'm not. And then she said to me, well, what made you decide to leave a law firm? And I said, well, I had a baby, and I didn't think she was gonna be proud of me. And so we bonded around that. I offer her a job on the spot. And she said, let me think about it. And a few days later, I call her, and I'm like, well, what do you think? And she said, well, my fiance doesn't think it's such a great idea. And I'm like, well, why do we care what he thinks? You and I bonded, and we're gonna change the world together right here in Chicago. And she laughed at me like you guys are. And she said, well, how about having dinner with us? And I said yes, because I would have done anything to get her. And so I had dinner with them. And the funny part of the dinner is 3 things I would say about the dinner. Number one, he said, so where are you from? I said, Chicago. He said, where'd you grow up? I said, Chicago. He said, were you born here? And I was like, oh, man, I'm trying to impress her, and now I got to explain that. And so I said, no, I was born in Iran. And he said, well, that's interesting. Tell me the story. So I told him the story I told you. And he said, well, guess what? I lived in Indonesia during a part of my childhood. And I said, well, that's interesting. Tell me why. And he told me the story. And we found that the life lessons that I described to you were the exact same lessons that he learned during his time in Indonesia. And so I often say to myself, well, thank goodness I didn't just say, yeah, I was born in Chicago and leave it at that, or we would have never made this connection. And at the end of this now somewhat infamous dinner, I knew 2 things to be true. Number one, that he and Michelle would be married forever. And you could just feel not just the love as you would when you're engaged, but true respect. And people have often said to me, well, why did she need his approval to take a job? And I said, well, there's not a single decision he made in his professional life without her sitting right there as well. And so I thought, this is a marriage that will last and test the test of time. And the other thing I thought is maybe one day, because they both had expressed this interest in public service. And he just finished law school, so he wasn't even a state senator. And I said, maybe one day he could be mayor of Chicago. So he reminds me on a regular basis that he has exceeded my expectations from back in that day.
This is going well, but I want to make a little detour to the private sector. We're going to come back to the public sector, but to the private sector, because you didn't stay in city government with Michelle Robinson. You left.
I did.
So why did you leave?
Well, after it had been a total of 8 years, so 4 years practicing law, summer in the mayor's office, and then running the Department of Planning and Development, you were getting older. I was staring at college tuition, and I thought, you know what, it's probably time for me to look at moving on. And the Department of Planning and Development was a tough department to run, even with all of the help that I had. And so I was thinking, well, let's explore other alternatives. And so I ended up joining the Habitat Company. And when I'd been in the planning department, we were the receiver for the Chicago Housing Authority and responsible for building all of their mixed income developments around Chicago. And the Habitat Company was the receiver. And I'd worked on that when I was in the planning department. And so it gave me the chance to kind of continue to do some of the work I'd done from the public sector, from the private sector, as well as, at that point, Habitat was the largest multifamily housing developer in Chicago. And we did everything from luxury downtown, condominiums and rental buildings to public housing. And so it was a nice segue into the private sector, and then ultimately became the CEO of that company.
And how much of it was you knew the people, and so you sort of felt like you knew the company, versus you were really passionate about real estate development? Not to be a leading question, but.
Well, you know what? I was at that point fascinated with how you could use real estate as a tool to transform communities in Chicago. And as you know, my grandfather had been chairman of the Chicago Housing Authority in the late 40s and early 50s, and he had resigned because he was so frustrated that at that point the city council didn't believe in mixed income housing or racially integrated housing. And so this gave me the chance to kind of continue his vision for Chicago 40 years later. And so I was quite taken with it, but while I was the Commissioner of Planning and Development, I did a lot of negotiations with the chairman of the Habitat Company, and you learn a lot about people when you're on the opposite side of the table. And he said the same thing about me. And I mean, one of the things, for example, he had built Presidential Towers, which is a huge, at that time, one of the largest residential developments on the West Loop of Chicago that transformed the West Loop. But he had acquired more land from the city in urban renewal than he actually needed. And so I went to him and I said, could I have some of that land back for a park? Developers don't give land back. And he said, sure. And I was like, oh, you are an unusual developer. And I learned a lot about his character and his integrity being on the other side of the table. And so it was both a people reason and also the opportunity, at least initially, to continue the work I had begun at the city.
So things are going well at the company. You've put me in school, humming along, and then we decide we're just gonna switch course
gears,
again,
yeah.
swerve again, and now we're moving to Washington.
Yeah, that was a pretty sudden decision on my part. But you know what? It's so funny because since I'd known the Obamas since they were basically children, and it felt like, and I'm older than they are, and I'd been Michelle's boss, and I had worked on all of his campaigns, but I chaired the finance committee, and so I kind of thought I was the boss of him then when he ran for Senate. And I'd worked on his presidential campaign, increasingly so, and in fact, to the point where my parents said, you are the CEO of a company, and you were spending all your time on the road, and he's not gonna win, and so what are you doing? And I said, just trust me, trust me on this one, and I'll come back to that in a second. But it was this kind of leap of faith, and it is amusing, because I said to him at one point, you know, my hesitation is that I'm just so used to being the boss of you. And he said, yeah, but I'm gonna be the president of the United States of America, leader of the free world. I think it'd be okay, don't you? And I'm like, oh, probably so. And so we joked about it a lot. And I do remember after the election, because my parents, again, I told you, they grew up during Jim Crow. Unheard of that a black man would be president in their lifetime. And after the election, my dad had been very ill and he was in rehab. And the Obamas were on 60 Minutes the week after the election, maybe a week or two after the election. And I was sitting with my parents watching them on 60 Minutes. And they met them right after I did. So they also had known them for this long time and never thought that he'd get elected. And the 60 Minutes piece was just perfect. And when they finished, my mother said to me, how did you know that he could win? Not that he would win, but even that he could win. And I said, well, because you raised me to believe if you worked hard and you believed in something and you wouldn't take no for an answer and you had a dream, anything is possible. And she said, well, I never actually believed that. And then my father, he pipes in, yeah, me either. And I realized for the first time that my parents had raised me aspirationally, not shackled by their reality, but really motivated to discover my own. And what a gift that was, that these people who, you know, my great-grandfather, first black person to go to MIT in 1888. And his father was born a slave in Wilmington, North Carolina. And his father was a slave master. And after the Civil War, my great-great-grandfather became a carpenter and saved enough money to send my great-grandfather to MIT. And so I think it's always, that history has always motivated me to think of the infinite possibilities as well. And so my thought was, well, you know, if he doesn't win, he doesn't win, but why wouldn't we try? And I had learned a lesson when he ran for Senate, tried to talk him out of running for the US Senate, because he had just lost a congressional race.
As he likes to remind you frequently.
He reminds me of that quite often. Michelle and I, at least I had an ally, we had a brunch at my home. The whole purpose was to talk him out of running. And at the end of the brunch, he finally said to us, well, if I'm not afraid of losing, why are you guys so afraid? And Michelle said, so if you run and lose, are we kind of done with this political thing and you'll go get like a real job? And he said, yes, I promise I'll go get a real job. And she said, let's get this over. And needless to say, it didn't work according to plan.
I also am just struck by sort of the ins and outs of public-private sector, because I think sometimes there's this sort of bad rap around this revolving door in Washington. But I actually think in your case, you would say you were much better at your job in the White House, having just come from the private sector.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I would say each time I moved between the two, the prior experiences helped a lot. To your question, the reason why is, if you'll remember when President Obama took office, we were in the middle of this horrible economic crisis. The big banks were on the verge of collapse. The automobile industry was in bankruptcy. Millions of people were losing their jobs and their homes. And I think it was helpful for him to have somebody inside who actually had worked in the private sector. And back in local government, one of my jobs as Commissioner of Planning was to be in connection with the business community and advise on economic development and what we needed to do to make the city more conducive for people coming in and doing business. And I was mentioning to Andrew that the chairman of CNA, Ed Noah, had been the chairman of this outside council, and I got to know a lot of business leaders by asking for their advice. And it's the same thing that we did in the White House. The president wanted to know, what are the knobs that we need to turn in order to, number one, save the economy, and we did turn it around and cut the unemployment rate in half, stabilize the banks, stabilize the automobile industry, and try to put some rules of the road in place so that we don't end up in this situation again. And so I do think both my local government experience as well as my private sector experience and being a lawyer, all of that came in handy.
Are there things around the messaging of that you think are lessons that can be learned from, in terms of even how you guys talked about what you were going through? And okay, things were so bad, we know they were so bad, we're now working so hard to get on the other side of it. If people don't feel that, then
that's the hard thing. That's such an interesting, we haven't talked about this. It was a huge problem. And he would say, and I would agree, that the first couple of years we were so busy trying to get the policy right that we did not spend enough time outside of Washington explaining to the American people what we were trying to do. And there are only so many hours in the day, but to do it again, we would have worked more on the messaging and putting it in. And it's hard because you want to be optimistic and say we're making progress. At the same time, if people's lives don't feel that all of that macroeconomic levers that you turn trickled down to their dining room table, then it's hard for them to feel optimistic. And so we were always trying to calibrate it. And I'm not sure we got it right in the first 2 years. It got better in the second, and better, as all things you just get. And we also, look, I think being a first, whether you're first woman, first person of color, first anything, you might be a little more risk adverse to be unconventional. And I know one of the things I kept saying is, look, we have these rallies with 100,000 people. Let's keep doing those rallies and keep people excited about what we're doing. And the pushback I got was, he has to act presidential. You have to stand in the Rose Garden, and you have to stand in the stateroom. And it kind of, in my view, kind of like was squeezing the Barack Obama out of him. And I used to say, a la West Wing, where let Jed Bartlett be Jed Bartlett, any West Wing fans in here. And I'd say, let's let Barack Obama be Barack Obama. And I think he got more comfortable with that after a couple of years of realizing that, not that many people are actually listening to what happens in the briefing room or in the Rose Garden. And you got to meet people where they are, which means you got to get outside of Washington. And also, part of what I loved about my job was we used to call them real people. So we would invite in real people, and those were the people who were going to be most directly impacted by our policies. And he always wanted to hear directly from them. So when we did the Affordable Care Act, we'd have in women who had pre-existing conditions and needed preventive care, or moms whose young kids had cancer and they lost their insurance. And it just, not only that, it kept you honest and it kept you real, but it also made you focus on what might be the unintended consequences. And I think that also gets back to the economy. What decisions were we making that, although they might help right the ship, could potentially have an unintended consequence on a CEO's decision about whether or not to invest in the United States?
I want to make sure we have time for questions in here, but before I hand over the mic, speaking of economic drivers, your day job is working full-time now to do everything you can to make the Obama Foundation a success, which I know is vitally important for Chicago and for the neighborhoods, and I know that you're working tirelessly with state and local governments on that. Can you give us an update on how things are going and what you're most excited about?
Why, sure. So the Obama Foundation, which the president launched right after he left office, currently has leadership programs in the United States, Asia, Africa, and Europe. We have a scholarship program for juniors and seniors in college, partnering with Airbnb, so they get to go anywhere in the world they want to go during the summer and have summer job experiences. And I just met with a group of them that are returning to college now, and they are standing at least 3 feet taller, having had these incredible summer experiences. We have an initiative that helps boys and young men of color improve their trajectory. We focus globally on adolescent girls, keeping them in school, encouraging them to shoot for the stars. And we are building what will be, I think, an economic engine in Chicago on the south side, not far from where you grew up, nestled between the Museum of Science and Industry and the University of Chicago in Jackson Park. It's a 19.3-acre site that used to be a park. We're building in it, but we also tore up an enormous road that separated the Museum of Science and Industry from the park, and so it'll be net new parkland. And it will be both a presidential library, which will tell the story of his presidency and the people on whose shoulders he stands. We have a Chicago Public Library, so young people from Chicago can come and visit. We have a forum building for gatherings. We have an athletic center, walking trails, sledding hills. We don't get to sled in Chicago because it's flat, so we're building this hill. Vegetable garden. It will be weaving into the urban fabric. And so, yes, an economic engine for Chicago, but I hope a beacon of hope for the world. And it's obviously it's nonpartisan and it's intended to bring people together. And our mission is to inspire, empower, and connect people to go change their worlds. And to your point about running for office, part of where I am in life is not only being a great grandma, but to help the next generation. I've learned a lot. I don't know everything. I learned a lot from young people, but if we can help young people be more impactful globally, then that's leaving the world a little bit better. Both Barack and Michelle Obama are still relatively young and absolutely interested. He keeps saying, make me the coach now, put me in to players and help lift them up. And everybody from a young person thinking of running to office to the vice president who's the nominee for president, and everybody in between wants to help.
I know how hard you're working on it, and I know how much the city has invested in its success. So let's pass the mic. Don't be shy. I have more brain busters for her if needed, but okay. Hi.
Hi. Incredible. And I have interviewed your mother, but you did a much better job.
You were great too.
Yeah. So what's really interesting is you have been in the private sector, the public sector, and many, many jobs. You've seen a lot of leadership traits. So, and before I even go there, because I do want to ask you, what do you think is really needed to be a great leader in the public sector and private sector, running companies and what have you? And I just want to also acknowledge the work you're doing to advance women into the boardroom. And you and your whole cohort, Maggie Wilderrider and others, are just doing such an incredible job to put more women into the boardroom. So thank you so much, Valerie.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I believe that diversity is a strength. I think it gives companies a competitive advantage. This is not a nice to do. I think it's actually a must do.
Well, you're doing it big time. So tell us about the leadership that you've seen, public and private sector. What stands out to you?
Well, I think similar qualities, one difference. So I think temperament is important. I think staying calm under fire, appreciating the fact that you don't have all the answers, so humility, a willingness to listen, a willingness to build a team that will tell you what they really think. And so you have to recognize, particularly the higher you go, the power dynamic makes it less likely that people will tell you what they think, particularly if they disagree with you. And so leaders have always impressed me who are willing to actually do what is necessary to make people feel comfortable opening up and telling them what they really think, and developing a team in that way. I think integrity and character and a willingness to work really hard and to ask tough questions and to not make decisions rashly, and to think of ways of taking the long view and recognizing, particularly in our current climate where communications is so important, and thanks to social media, things can spiral out of control really quickly. And so being able to respond to the crisis of the moment while not losing track of where you really ultimately want to go. And then the final thing I'll say, you have to learn how to absorb a fair amount of pain without it either debilitating you or making you numb. And so having people in your life who actually love you and support you and are rooting for you is the salve that you need, I think, to help build that resilience. And it is tough in this current climate, being a leader, whether it's a political leader or running a business, large or small. Everybody is kind of, an edge right now. And so I think it's all the more reason why the temperament and the calmness and the deliberation and not getting pushed off course, but still being flexible. All of those are important.
Thank you.
Oh, while we're waiting for Paul, I will say the difference I didn't mention. Political leaders, you have a board, and let's say if you're president, you've got a board made up of members of Congress. Imagine if you were running a company and you had that many people on your board. State legislature, if you're the governor. So you do have to have the ability to realize that it certainly isn't command and control. It should probably never be that, but it is a lot harder to corral people to make progress, I think, in the public sector than the private.
Thank you. And I think it's real. Paula DePern, I'm with the Carbon Disclosure Project, had the pleasure of knowing Valerie in Chicago. And I'm so proud to even be able to say that. And thank you for setting the standard. And it's very important for us to remember President Obama won not once, but twice, overwhelmingly, with all those accomplishments, which says a lot about the country as much as about you. But my question has to pick up a little bit on Janice. When you're in that position of absorbing the pain and trying to be inclusive and bringing people to your leadership, how do you spread the risk without putting other people in danger?
That's an interesting question. Well, look, I think my experience is you have to create a safe space where people can come and have uncomfortable conversations. And that's harder today. And I have a whole opinion about young people and the fact that they've grown up with social media and they haven't had the experience of like looking in somebody's face and telling them something hard because they could just do it and then be done. And so one of the things we teach at the foundation is how do you bring people together to have these uncomfortable conversations in a safe place? And it is a skill that has to be practiced. And so I think part of the answer to your question is trying to set the table. And I can think of, one of my jobs in the White House was public engagement, which meant a whole range of constituency groups. And they often disagreed with each other. So like all my kids were disagreeing all the time. And they would come to me and they'd make I'll give you one example. We were trying to decide whether to require federal contractors to not discriminate against people in the LGBTQ community. Well, the faith groups had a lot of business with the federal government, received a lot of dollars, and did not want that prohibition. The LGBTQ groups definitely wanted to know that their tax dollars were not going to be spent on a company that would discriminate against them. Very polarizing. I picked the people who I trusted the most representing both groups, and I invited them to my office. I said, let's have a conversation. And the level of civility when they were faced with one another went up dramatically compared to what I would hear talking to either group. In the end, the president did sign the executive order, and there wasn't a lot of blowback. And I think it's because people came at it from a much more human perspective, because they were looking at the person who was going to be affected by the decision. And so I think that's a way of spreading the risk as you bring people to the table. So it's not just you making the decision, and that people are really being active and engaged listeners, and you can set that table. The person who's the host, who uses their good offices, should be able to set the table accordingly.
Hi, Valerie and Laura, thank you so much. Such a wonderful, engaging discussion. Your story is incredible, but yet so relatable on a human level. I would just love to hear what would be the number one piece of advice you'd have to give to women who are looking to take on their first leadership role in the corporate sector.
So, no offense to the gentleman in the room, but I've never really met a man who, like on the first day, didn't think he deserved a promotion, right? And I say this gingerly because you guys know I'm right. You do think you actually are deserving. And I think sometimes we can be our worst enemies. And you are no doubt over-prepared. You're going to work harder because this is what you always had to do to get where you are. And so have the confidence to believe in yourself and don't put a brick on your own head. And also build allies. One of the things I would share with you is even in the White House, women who were in positions of leadership had a little bit of the imposter syndrome. And it didn't help that we were facing this horrible economic crisis and 2 wars and everything else that President Obama walked into. But I noticed early on that the women's voices were shrinking in the room. And it's because the guys were talking over them, and some woman would say something, and 2 minutes later, some guy would say the exact same thing, and everyone thought that was a brilliant idea. And that was so diminishing to the woman who had the first brilliant idea. And so I told President Obama, and he said, well, I'm going to invite all the women in, we're going to talk this through, which I thought was pretty sensitive of him to say, I don't want that kind of culture. I'm working against that. I was raised by a single mom. I'm married to a badass woman. I've got 2 daughters. I want a better culture than what you were describing. And he said, it's funny, I don't notice it when they're in here. I'm like, no, of course not. Everybody's on their best behavior around you, but when you're not in the room, it's like it's chaos. And so he said, look, I will talk to the women, and I'm going to talk to the men. So have them come for dinner. So I went to all the women and I said, we're going to have this dinner. You better tell him the truth. Because you're going to be tempted not to, because you're going to think, okay, he's president, he's busy, I shouldn't be, complaining about the guys. I said, if you do that, I look stupid, because I've told him there's a problem. So come in and talk up, and they did. End of the dinner, he said, look, this is the White House. I'm making decisions that affect hundreds of millions of people, if not billions. You are here because I picked you. You have subject matter expertise, and you have judgment, and you've been vetted. This isn't an accident that you're here. I gave you this spot. You go in there and don't fight for your pride or your ego. Fight for your ideas, because you're fighting for me, because I will make a better decision with the benefit of your input. Hugely empowering, but that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is, he said, if you don't see things getting better, tell Valerie we're going to have another dinner, and this time we're going to bring in the guys. But I'm going to work on this, and I want you to work on it. And so what did we do? We started having dinner on our own, just the women. We talked about our families, our children, our hopes, our dreams. We talked about the guys. We talked about the president, and we became friends. And so part of my encouragement to you is to build a network of relationships with people with whom you work. Because if you go into a meeting and you're nervous and you're not sure about what to say, and you make eye contact with somebody who you just were at their home over the weekend with a play date with your family, it gives you courage. There really is safety in numbers, which gets back to the point of why diversity is so important, is because you need to feel welcomed at the table, but you also need to help set the table so that you do feel welcome. And if you are the only woman at the table, like, shame on you if you don't open up the door and ensure that more people come behind you. I mean, that's part of how I define my success, is whether or not the aperture is bigger when I leave. So build those allies, have confidence in yourself, know you are there for a purpose, and that you add enormous value. So do know your value. I know what that means.
That's the wrap. That's the wrap signal.
Yes, thank you both. What a great conversation. The
Thank you,
clock, unfortunately, is continuing to
run.
tick. So I just want to cover very quickly our lineup of speakers, and we have a great one for the fall. Selwyn Vickers is going to join us October the 8th, the CEO of Memorial Sloan Kettering. He'll be in a conversation with Marie-José Kravis, so that's a don't miss. Be sure you're there. We have Richard Clarita, who's former vice chair at the Board of Governors at the Fed. He will be here. He's now economic advisor at PIMCO. And of course, Charlie Cook, before the election, will be joining us. He loves coming up in November. He'll be in a conversation with Bob Rubin, another member of the club. And then we have Wick Grausback, who is the governor, owner of the Boston Celtics. So we're delighted to have him joining us in October as well. And of course, as I think most folks know, we're trying very hard to bring the Democratic nominee, Kamala Harris, to the club, as we did with the Republicans. So those efforts are continuing. And so please stay tuned to your email and our website. As a reminder, the club launched its first ever podcast last year. We're excited to announce we're now on season 2. And of course, this is hosted by Becky Quick. It is titled The Forum. And we have a session that includes a lot of famous names that have come and joined us, like Jamie Dimon, Larry Summers, and others. So please take a look. It's everywhere that you would go to watch a podcast, Spotify, you name it, it's there. And then, as always, we like to close by recognizing those members in attendance that are in the Centennial Society, which provides the financial backbone of support for the club and our programming. So thank you, everyone. For those virtually, we'll see you later, and hopefully at our next event. And for those in the room, please enjoy your lunch. Thank you.